The sun that day felt like it had teamed up with the heat to squeeze every drop of energy out of us. Sweat trickled down my back, sticky and relentless beneath my shirt. I regretted wearing long pants, but taking them off would have been a bit too much, even in this unbearable heat. He worked in a t-shirt, soaked dark with sweat, and eventually pulled it off, keeping only his vest. I pretended to focus on my garden shears, though I couldn't help but notice his sun-kissed shoulders. We were both clearing the tangled mess behind the old apple trees. My husband had long since given up on the place, said he had bigger things to worry about. My nephew had offered to help, saying it would be a good distraction after his messy divorce. At first, I agreed without a second thought, but day by day, his presence grew heavier, harder to ignore, more than I dared admit to myself. And then, I caught his gaze. It lingered on me just a heartbeat too long, and there was something in it beyond the exhaustion of the heat. It felt like a jolt of electricity shot through me, sharp and real. He quickly looked away, but the moment had already happened. And no matter how much I tried, I couldn't shake it off. Something strange, almost physical, settled between us. We said nothing, neither of us, but from that instant, the garden felt a lot smaller. Later, as the evening crept in, we carried the baskets of apples back to the house. The sun dipped low, shadows stretched longer, and the air cooled slightly. As I pushed open the porch door, one of the baskets tilted, and apples spilled across the floor with a dull thud. He stepped forward fast to steady the basket, and his hands almost instinctively landed on my waist. I froze. So did he. His fingers lingered just a little too long, and instead of stepping away, I let the moment unfold. My breath caught, and a strange warmth spread through me, as if I'd found myself standing right at the edge of something forbidden. But really now, who in my place could have resisted? The porch felt a little easier to breathe on than the garden, though the heat still hung heavy like a thick blanket. I set a jug of homemade cider on the table. I'd brought it up from the cellar earlier, knowing full well the sun would soon demand something refreshing. He smiled as he poured himself a full glass and said with such honest warmth, "I had no idea you made cider like this. It's a real treasure." For some reason, his words made me feel oddly flustered, as if he'd noticed something more in me than just the garden keeper. We sat at the table, and what began as talk about the weather and the harvest slowly drifted into something far more personal. Without even realizing it, I found myself telling him how this garden had once been my husband's and my shared dream. We had pictured long family evenings here, gathered under the vines around a big wooden table. But time, as it does, wore that dream thin, like a leaf left out too long in the sun. My husband traveled more and more, leaving me alone among the neglected beds and silent trees. He listened closely, almost too closely, then started speaking about his divorce. His voice caught just slightly as he admitted how hard it had been to wake up in an empty house, where only the walls remembered the life he'd lost. His words stirred something deep in me. It felt like he'd spoken my own hidden thoughts aloud. And then something happened that I hadn't expected at all. My scarf had slipped down around my neck from the heat, and without thinking, he reached out to adjust it. His fingers brushed my skin slower than they needed to. Our eyes met, and in that instant, the air between us thickened. His hand lingered just a moment longer, but that moment was more than enough to send a tremor through me. That night, he stayed in the garden house, not wanting to drive back to the city in the heavy heat. And me? I tossed and turned, replaying that almost accidental touch over and over in my mind. Somehow, it didn't feel accidental at all. The morning was so blistering hot, it felt like the sun had settled right on our shoulders, burning straight through our skin. Sweat dripped down my temples, gathering in sticky little trails along my neck. We were hauling planks for the gazebo, and I kept fighting the urge to wipe my forehead every other minute. He noticed, of course, and with a playful grin, he nodded toward the old pond behind the garden. "How about a dip? Might just save our lives," he teased with that glint in his eyes. I refused at first, saying something about catching a cold in this kind of heat. But he didn't let up, teasing me like a mischievous kid. "Come on, you're not really scared of the water, are you?" I laughed, honestly surprised at how easy the sound came out of me. Lately, it felt like all the laughter had dried up inside me, and this little moment felt like a breath of life. Eventually, I gave in. I slipped off my work shirt, left in just my underwear, trying not to think about how it must have looked. He pulled off his sweat-soaked shirt too, and right then, our eyes met and somehow locked. Harmless, maybe, but a strange flutter rippled through me all the same. The pond water was warmer than I expected, sunlight dancing across its surface like liquid gold. We splashed like kids, laughing so freely it felt like the world had vanished. Then, suddenly, he grabbed me by the waist and before I could react, tossed me playfully into the water. His hand slid along my back, and our faces came so close, I swear I forgot to breathe. Inside, it felt like a coiled spring ready to snap. I could feel the tension stretching tight, dangerously tight. But just at that breaking point, we both pulled away sharply, as if we'd silently agreed to stop. Still, how could I forget the way my skin had burned under his fingertips? That morning, he came to me with an idea that honestly caught me off guard. My nephew suggested we finish the gazebo, said it could be a nice surprise for my husband's return. He'll be happy to see the garden finally coming to life, he said, wiping sweat from his brow. I liked how certain he sounded, so casual, like we'd been working together for years, like this was our shared project. Later, a message arrived from my husband. His trip was extended, he wouldn't be back until next week. I exhaled, feeling a weight I hadn't noticed slide off my shoulders. It felt like we'd been granted a little extra time, and truthfully, I let myself relax more than I should have. Was that a mistake? Probably, but I didn't think about it then. That evening, we stayed out on the porch, strung up lanterns, poured some wine, and let the conversation drift. It started with lighthearted stories and silly memories, but glass by glass, it sank into something deeper, almost too personal. I found myself admitting how I'd dreamed of family evenings in this garden, of children's laughter beneath the vines that never came. He listened so closely as if my words brushed against something inside him. And then he said, quietly but clearly, "I never saw you as just my aunt. You've always been a woman to me." His words startled me, leaving me unsure how to respond. He leaned in, and without thinking, I simply closed my eyes, feeling my heart pounding like a drum. Our lips met in a kiss that was brief but full of fire. In that moment, I realized just how far we'd gone. This wasn't innocent. Not anymore. I knew I should have stopped. I knew. But somehow I couldn't make myself pull away. After that kiss, I nearly fled to my room as if trying to escape from myself. I shut the door, leaned against it, and stood there, feeling my heart pounding so hard it might burst from my chest. I promised myself that nothing like that would happen again, no matter how much I wanted it. I even almost believed it. But clearly not enough. The next day, the heat was unbearable. The sun hung so low it felt like it might explode. That morning, we both pretended nothing had happened the night before. We talked about the garden, about our work, as if everything was perfectly normal. But beneath every word, something hotter simmered, something we were both struggling to ignore. We ended up alone in the garden with no distractions to pull us away. I tried to focus on the chores, but my thoughts kept dragging me back to that kiss. Everything inside me felt unraveled, and I couldn't seem to pull it back together. He came over to help with the heavy watering can, and our fingers met on the handle. He gripped my hands firmly, holding them against his chest. I could feel his heart racing, fast and wild, just like mine. And then something snapped. I don't even know who moved first, but our lips found each other in a kiss, fierce and reckless. Our bodies tangled, and we lowered ourselves onto the wooden platform by the flower beds, blind to everything else around us. The sun scorched my back, but inside, the fire burned so much hotter. Right in the middle of that moment, I heard the creak of the garden gate. My heart crashed into my stomach. My husband stepped into the garden, circled the hedge, and froze. His gaze burned through us. We froze, caught in the act. My nephew pulled away, and I couldn't even breathe. None of us spoke, and neither did he. He didn't say a word, just turned away and slowly walked out of the garden. I stood frozen, unable to move, listening to his footsteps fade behind the gate. Inside me, everything twisted into a painful knot. I barely slept that night, replaying every moment, every mistake, wondering how it all fell apart. I hoped, foolishly, that it couldn't get worse. But by morning, I saw how wrong I was. My husband returned to the garden, his face cold as steel. Years ago, he'd struggled with his nerves, an old battle we thought he'd long since won. We hadn't spoken of it in ages. He had seemed steady, almost unshakable. But what he saw yesterday shattered that fragile balance. Something inside him cracked. Without a word, he grabbed a fuel can. I ran to him, pleading for him to stop. I begged him not to do this, told him burning the garden would destroy everything we'd built. But he stayed icy calm, disturbingly certain, like he'd made this decision long before. Flames roared to life, swallowing the gazebo, the dry branches, the brittle grass. My nephew stood beside me, his face dark with worry. He spoke softly, said we could leave together, run away from this, and start fresh. But I hesitated. As much as I wanted to escape, a bitter truth settled deep in my chest. This affair had gone too far. I couldn't forgive myself, no matter how hard I tried. Pressing my lips tight, I turned away, knowing I had to leave alone, to vanish, leaving only ashes behind. Before I walked away, my husband's final words cut through the smoke. You planted your garden without me. Now it burns with your hopes.